Why is someone else living in our house?
Your brother sold it 2 years ago.
Then where are my parents?
Ryan, they lost almost everything.
I sent $500,000. Where is it? You abandoned them. Dennis stole it all these years.
You never answered.
Mom, I never stopped sending money home.
We never blamed you.
We're glad you're home.
He had sent money every month for 14 years. He had believed every reassurance his brother gave him. He had told himself that responsibility from a distance was still responsibility. But now Ryan Mercer stood on the porch of the house he grew up in, watching a stranger's child peer at him through the screen door, and understood that everything he had trusted had been a lie. He just didn't know yet how complete the lie was. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It had started with a birthday, his father's 75th, and a flight home that was supposed to be a surprise. Ryan had taken the Singapore to Atlanta connection, then driven the rental car south through Tennessee and into eastern Kentucky, with the radio off and the windows cracked. The mountains were familiar in the way that childhood things are familiar. You don't think about them while you're away. But when they reappear, something in your chest recognizes them before your mind does. He had grown up breathing this particular air. Harlan County. Coal country. The kind of place that produced people who either stayed or left and rarely went back. He had left at 28. He was returning at 42. The drive through town was slower than he remembered new traffic lights. A hardware store converted into a gym, a diner that had changed hands twice by the look of it. But Birchwood Ridge Road was the same. The curve past the Whitfield place, the long, straight stretch lined with old maples, the mailbox post his father had set himself in 1988, that still leaned slightly to the left. Except the mailbox had a different name on it. Ryan slowed. He told himself it was a mistake, wrong road, wrong house. But he knew this road. He had walked it 10,000 times. He pulled to the curb and looked at the house. It had been repainted. A lighter color than he remembered, almost cream, where the old house had been a dusty blue-gray. The flower beds were different. A silver sedan sat in the driveway that had never belonged to his parents. And there was a child's bicycle leaning against the porch railing, bright red, too new. He sat for a moment. Then he got out of the car and walked to the porch. He knocked on the door, heard movement inside. Footsteps. The inner door opened and a man in his 30s stood behind the screen, looking at Ryan with polite wariness. "Help you," Ryan kept his voice level. "I'm looking for Frank and Ruth Mercer. This is their house." The man's expression shifted, not unkind, but definite. "Not anymore. We bought this place about 2 years back. Mercer family sold it." Ryan stood very still. "Do you know where they went?" "No, sir. We dealt with the seller's representative. Never met the family." The door began to close gently. Ryan stepped back. The child who had been watching through the screen disappeared into the house. The door clicked shut. He stood on the porch, where his mother used to sit with her coffee in the mornings, looking at the street that was the same, and the house that wasn't, and the afternoon light falling exactly as it always had in October over Harlan County. He didn't move for a long moment. Then, from across the street, he heard his name. Ryan Mercer. He turned. Lorraine Whitfield stood at the edge of her yard, one hand shading her eyes against the low sun. She was older, they all were, but her posture was the same, upright and certain, the posture of a woman who had always known what was happening on this street and didn't pretend otherwise. "Lorraine." She crossed to him. Her face was careful, the expression of someone who has been holding information and is now calculating how much to release and how fast. "You didn't know," she said. It wasn't a question. "I didn't know," Ryan confirmed. She looked at him for another moment, reading him, he thought, checking whether he was someone she could trust with what she knew. Apparently he passed because she exhaled and said, "Your parents are alive and they're in town. I'll give you the address. But first you need to understand something." "What?" Lorraine's eyes were direct and steady. "He's not here, Ryan. Your brother, he's not here. Your parents haven't lived in this house for 2 years." The words landed the way physical things land, with weight, and no immediate comprehension, just the sensation of impact. Ryan looked at the house again. The stranger's bicycle, the cream-colored paint over what used to be blue-gray. "Where are they?" he said. Lorraine pulled a small notepad from her cardigan pocket. She had already written the address. She handed it to him like she had known this day would come and had been keeping the paper ready. "Go see them," she said. "And then come find me. Because there's more." Lorraine told him what she had seen in the few minutes they stood in the driveway. She kept it factual and short, which Ryan understood was both her nature and a kindness she could sense he needed to drive, not stand still. Dennis had appeared at the house 18 months ago, she said, with a truck and 2 men she didn't recognize. He had told her when she came over to ask that Frank and Ruth were downsizing, that the house was too much to maintain, that he was moving them to a place that would be easier for them. He had said it with the tone of a responsible son doing a difficult thing, and at the time she had accepted it. She hadn't liked it, but she had accepted it. The house sold about 6 weeks after they moved out. She saw the sign go up. She saw it come down. She had the address of where Frank and Ruth had gone because Ruth had written it on a piece of paper and pushed it through her mailbox slot the morning they left. No note. Just the address. She didn't say anything. Ryan asked. Lorraine looked at him steadily. "She wrote your name on the other side of the paper," she said. "Like maybe she was hoping I'd know what to do with it." He drove to the east side of Harlan with the address on Lorraine's notepad on the passenger seat, and his hands very steady on the wheel. The rental car's GPS announced the turn without understanding what it meant. He pulled into the parking area of a 2-story building, plain brick, a small American flag by the entrance, the particular cleanliness of a place where people try to maintain dignity in tight circumstances. He sat in the car for a moment. Then he got out. The number on the door was 14. He knocked. There was a pause longer than he expected, and then the sound of movement inside, and the door opened, and his mother was standing there. She looked at him. He looked at her. Her hair had gone completely white, which it hadn't been the last time he'd been home 6 years ago. She was thinner. She wore a cardigan he didn't recognize over a blouse he did. She'd had it for 15 years at least. She looked at his face the way she always had when she was trying to decide if he was all right. Then recognition moved through her eyes and something else behind it. Not grief exactly, not joy exactly, something wider and less nameable than either, and she said his name very quietly. "Hi, Mom." She stepped back to let him in. The living room was small, the furniture familiar, but compressed, the same couch from the old house, the same side table. Everything that had filled 4 rooms now arranged to fill 1.5. The photographs on the wall were the same photographs, just closer together. The kitchen was visible from where he stood, a narrow galley. There was a smell of coffee and something cooking. Frank Ruth called toward the back hallway. "Frank, come out here." His father appeared in the doorway a few seconds later. He moved with a slight stiffness in one hip that Ryan hadn't remembered wearing his good flannel shirt, the dark red one he reserved for occasions. He stopped when he saw Ryan. His face went through several things at once. "Hey, Dad." Frank crossed the room in 3 steps and put his arms around Ryan without a word. He was thinner too, and Ryan could feel it, the change in the frame of a man who had always been solid. They held on for a moment. Ryan felt the particular completeness of being held by a parent, the sense that regardless of everything else, this at least was real and undiminished. They sat. Ruth brought coffee. They asked the normal questions, the flight, the company, whether Ryan had eaten. He answered and asked back. Frank said his hip was fine, just a little stiff in the morning. Ruth said she was keeping herself busy. She worked at a florist shop on 2nd Street a few days a week, she mentioned, just to have somewhere to be. Ryan looked at his mother. She was 70 years old and working at a florist shop. He nodded and said nothing yet. He asked about the move. Frank and Ruth exchanged a brief look, the particular speed of a look between people who have agreed on a story. Dennis thought it made more sense, Frank said. The house was getting to be a lot, and it made financial sense to simplify. Did you want to move? Another brief look. Ruth said carefully. We understood the reasoning. Ryan looked around the apartment, the familiar things in the unfamiliar space, the photographs closer together than they should be, the compressed life of 2 people who once had a house and now had this. He didn't push further. Not yet. After about an hour, Ruth said she needed to check on the stove. When she disappeared into the kitchen, Frank looked at Ryan for a moment, measuring something. Then he said quietly, "There's something I want to show you." He went to the bedroom. Ryan heard the sound of a closet opening, something being moved. Frank returned carrying a metal box, the size of a shoebox, dark gray, with a small combination lock on the front. He set it on the coffee table between them. "I've had this about 2 years," Frank said. "I kept thinking I'd know what to do with it. Then you showed up." He turned the combination and lifted the lid. The first document on top was a bank statement. Ryan's name was printed in the transfer field. The recipient account was labeled with Dennis Mercer's name. The date was 14 months ago. The amount was $3,500. Ryan looked at it. Then he looked at his father. Frank said nothing. He just held the lid open and waited for Ryan to understand. Ryan went through the box, while the sound of Ruth's cooking came from the kitchen and the afternoon light shifted across the apartment wall. The documents were organized not in a lawyer's way, but in a careful man's way. Each item set beside the ones it belonged with. Bank statements, first 4 of them, all showing the same pattern. Ryan's transfer arriving in Dennis's personal account. No secondary transfer to a joint family account. No indication the money had moved further. Just Dennis's name and the amounts and the dates. Next, the home equity loan paperwork. Ryan read through it carefully. A lender he didn't recognize, not their family's bank, specializing in property-secured loans for homeowners with limited income. The loan amount was $195,000. The property listed as collateral was the house on Birchwood Ridge Road. The borrowers were Frank and Ruth Mercer, with Dennis Mercer listed as their authorized representative under power of attorney. He set that aside and found the power of attorney itself. A notarized document, 2 pages, granting Dennis full authority over Frank and Ruth's financial affairs. He looked at the date, February 14th. He looked at the next item in the box, Frank's hospital admission records. Frank had been admitted February 9th for a lumbar spinal surgery. He had been discharged February 18th. The power of attorney had been signed on February 14th. Day 5 of a 9-day hospital stay. Ryan looked up from the documents. Frank was watching him from across the table, his hands folded in his lap. "When Dennis brought this to you," Ryan said, keeping his voice even, "what did he tell you?" It was for Frank, didn't hesitate. He had clearly rehearsed this, or at least thought it through many times. He said it was so he could pay the utility bills and the insurance while I was laid up. He said it was standard, that lots of families did it when someone had surgery. Did you read it before you signed? Frank's jaw tightened slightly, not at Ryan but at the memory. I tried. My eyes weren't tracking right. The medication made everything blurry. I asked Dennis to tell me what it said, and he read parts of it aloud. He said it was just so he could write checks in my name while I was recovering. And the notary A-man Dennis brought with him. I don't know him. Ryan looked at the hospital records again. Day 5 of a 9-day recovery from spinal surgery. He didn't know the exact medication protocol, but he knew enough about post-surgical pain management to understand what Day 5 looked like. He found the next set of documents, the foreclosure notice. The home equity loan had gone into default 7 months after it was issued. Payments had been made for the first 2 months, then stopped. The notice was dated 11 months ago. Then the sale documents the house sold for $278,000. After satisfying the outstanding loan balance plus fees, approximately $73,000 had been distributed to Dennis as the authorized representative. Ryan set the documents down. He looked at the wall. Outside, a car passed on the street. In the kitchen, Ruth was moving pots. Did Dennis tell you the loan had defaulted? Ryan asked. He told us the house had to be sold. He said it was better to sell it cleanly than let the bank take it. He said he'd handled everything. Did he tell you how much the house sold for? Frank looked at his hands. He said after the debts were settled, there wasn't much left. Ryan absorbed that. After the debts were settled, meaning the proceeds had gone somewhere, and it wasn't to Frank and Ruth. Have you been getting money from Dennis? Ryan asked. Monthly. Frank nodded slowly. 600 or so. Every month. He said that's what he could manage. Ryan thought about the 14 years of transfers. He thought about $600 a month in Harlan County, Kentucky, for 2 people in their 70s. He thought about his mother working at the florist shop on 2nd Street 3 days a week, just to help with utilities. He closed the metal box and looked at his father. Frank said I didn't know what to do with any of it. I couldn't figure out how to reach you without Dennis knowing, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at exactly. I just knew it didn't feel right, so I kept it. You did the right thing, Ryan said. He meant it. Ruth appeared in the doorway. She looked at the closed metal box on the table, and then at Ryan, and then at Frank, reading the room with the precision of a woman who had spent decades understanding what men weren't saying aloud. Stay for dinner, she said. Not a question. Yes, Ryan said. After dinner, driving back to the motel, Ryan called Dennis. The phone rang twice, 3 times. Then his brother's voice, unhurried and warm, as if he'd been expecting a pleasant call. Hey, little brother. I heard you were in town. Ryan said we should talk. Tomorrow. In person. A brief pause. Of course. You want to catch up, I get it. Everything okay with Mom and Dad? They're fine, Ryan said. Tomorrow. Sure. Diner on Main around 10. That works. He hung up, drove through Harlan in the dark. Thought about the documents in the metal box. Thought about his father's voice. He said it was standard, that lots of families did it. Thought about the number on the power of attorney. February 14th. Thought about the notary Dennis had brought with him to the hospital on the 5th day of his father's recovery from spine surgery. He thought this was not an accident. The diner on Main Street still had the same booths, the same checkered tile, the same smell of coffee and something frying that had nothing to do with the hour. Ryan arrived first and ordered coffee. He sat facing the door. Dennis came in at 10:15 unhurried, wearing a canvas work jacket and a baseball cap with the Mercer & Sons contracting logo. He was heavier than Ryan remembered, and looked it in the comfortable way of someone who has stopped worrying about it. He walked through the diner with the ease of a man who knew the room, nodded to someone at the counter, pulled out the booth seat across from Ryan with the practiced motion of someone who had this conversation at this table regularly. "Good to see you, brother." He extended a hand. Ryan shook it. Dennis ordered coffee and an egg sandwich. He asked about the flight, about the company in Germany, about whether Singapore was everything people said it was. He was warm and curious and entirely normal, and that normality itself was informative. A man with nothing to hide would also be normal. But a man who had carefully maintained a fiction for 14 years would have precisely this quality relaxed, because he'd had years of practice. Ryan let the small talk run for a few minutes. Then he said, "Tell me about the house." Dennis leaned back. His expression shifted to something rueful, responsible, the look of a man facing an unpleasant topic he'd been managing carefully. "It was hard," he said. "Dad's health was getting complicated. The maintenance on that house was more than they could handle, and there were property taxes they'd gotten behind on. I had to make a call." "What kind of call?" The home equity loan was the only option. It covered the back taxes and gave us working capital to bridge things for a while. He spread his hands. "Not ideal. But I was trying to keep them afloat." And when the loan defaulted, Dennis's expression remained steady, practiced, Ryan thought. "I had problems with my business around the same time. Cash flow. It was a rough stretch. I couldn't cover all of it, and the loan payments too. The house had to go. I hated it. But sometimes those are the choices." Where did the proceeds go after the loan was settled? Into their living expenses. The apartment costs money. Their utilities, food, the car insurance. It adds up. He held Ryan's gaze without difficulty. "I know it's not what any of us wanted. But I was here, Ryan. I was the one making the calls at midnight when Dad couldn't sleep from the back pain. I was the one driving them to appointments. You were in Stuttgart building your company. That's fine, I'm not criticizing. You had opportunities I didn't have. But you can't come back after 14 years and second-guess decisions that had to be made in real time." It was a good speech. Ryan recognized it for what it was, not because it was entirely false, but because it was calibrated. Every true thing in it, Dennis had stayed. Ryan had been absent. The decisions had been real, was arranged to obscure the things that weren't true. "I've been sending $3,500 a month," Ryan said, "for 14 years. How did it work? Did you transfer it to them directly?" "I managed the funds. They didn't need to deal with the accounting details. I covered what needed covering." "How much of the monthly support did they receive?" Dennis didn't hesitate, which was the wrong instinct in that moment, though he didn't know it. "I was getting them about $600 a month in cash. The rest went to overhead. The house maintenance alone was." "You were passing on $600 of $3,500, Ryan said. "On average, yes, after all the costs were accounted for." "Is that what this is about?" "You think I was cutting corners, Ryan? I was fronting costs out of my own pocket some months when things were tight." Ryan looked at him across the diner's table. He thought about what Frank had told him about what the documents showed about the loan amount and the dates. Then he said carefully, "What was the total on the home equity loan? I'd have to look it up." "Around $191.95. He said it without pausing. He said it without any indication that he was retrieving a fact from memory versus retrieving it from knowledge. He said it the way you say a number you have always known. Ryan had not mentioned the home equity loan documents to Dennis in this conversation. He had asked about the house. He had asked about proceeds. He had not specified any number. He kept his face neutral. He said, "I'd like to see the records. Whatever you have." Sure. I'll pull them together. It's been a couple years, so they might take a bit." Dennis drank his coffee. Listen, I understand this is a shock. You came back expecting everything to be a certain way and it's different. That's hard. But I need you to understand that I did the best I could in situations you weren't here for. That's all I can say, Ryan nodded. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. Then Ryan said he had other things to get to, and they shook hands again, and he walked out into the October air. He sat in the rental car and opened his laptop. He had access to his bank's international transfer records going back 15 years. He pulled up the account and ran the export. The file loaded 14 years of monthly transfers, each one confirmed, delivered, each one showing the same destination account. Dennis Mercer. All $504,000 of it. Every transfer confirmed. Not one missing. He sat in the parking lot of the diner on Main Street in Harlan, Kentucky, and looked at the numbers until the pattern was unmistakable. Dennis had known the exact loan amount before Ryan mentioned it, because Dennis had arranged it. Because Dennis had been at the center of every financial decision that moved money away from Frank and Ruth Mercer for the past 14 years. Ryan closed the laptop. He thought, I need a lawyer. Pamela Rhodes's office was in Lexington, but she had a standing arrangement with a conference room at a law office in London, Kentucky, 35 miles northwest of Harlan. Close enough to drive far enough that Dennis wouldn't hear about it through the usual small-town channels. Ryan found her through a referral from a Louisville attorney he'd worked with on a business contract. Elder financial exploitation, Pamela's specialty, was not a niche Ryan had ever imagined needing. He was beginning to understand how many things he hadn't imagined. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the manner of someone who had seen a great deal of human behavior and had organized her opinions of it into precise categories. She listened to Ryan for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked specific questions for 20 more. She looked at the photographs Ryan had taken of the documents in Frank's metal box. Two distinct problems, she said. First, the power of attorney. If your father was administered oxycodone and a muscle relaxant on the day he signed, and if the hospital records document that he was experiencing disorientation, which post-surgical notes frequently do, then the document may be voidable on capacity grounds. That's the foundation of everything Dennis did afterward. Knock the POA out and the home equity loan, the management of the proceeds. All of it becomes unauthorized action, and second is the financial diversion. 14 years of transfers from you, a fraction reaching your parents. That's elder financial abuse under Kentucky statute, regardless of the POA question. We'll need Dennis's bank records. She made a note. I work with a forensic accountant named Graham Foss. He's done this kind of trace before. I'll bring him in. The legal process of subpoenaing bank records took just under 2 weeks. During that time, Ryan stayed in Harlan, renting by the week at a motel on Route 421. He had dinner with his parents most evenings. He helped Frank carry a heavy box of books from the bedroom closet to a more accessible shelf. He sat with Ruth on the small balcony of the apartment in the evenings, drinking coffee and looking at the street below. One evening, Ruth mentioned the florist shop again, more details this time because Ryan had asked gently. It's nice work, she said. The owner, Mrs. Hadley, is good about scheduling. I do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, mornings mostly. How long have you been working there? Going on 2 years. She looked at her coffee. It helps with the utilities. The electric bill runs high in winter. 2 years. She had been working 3 days a week for 2 years at 70 years old because the apartment's electric bill was more than what Dennis was passing along every month. Ryan thought about $600 a month. He thought about the $3,500 he sent every month without exception, confirmed delivered. He thought about the gap between those numbers and what it meant for two people in their 70s to live inside that gap. He didn't say any of this to Ruth. He said the work sounded like good company and asked about the flowers. Ruth talked about the seasonal arrangements for a while, and it was clear she genuinely enjoyed it, which made it worse somehow. Not the working itself, but the reason for it. The following Tuesday, Frank mentioned that he had to call the pharmacy about one of his prescriptions. He said it carefully, the way older people say things they don't want to be a problem. His blood pressure medication. The pharmacy had called to say the insurance had a gap this month, and the full price was higher than usual. How much, Ryan asked. Frank waved a hand. We'll sort it out. Ryan said, Dad. Frank looked at him. Then he said, it was about 4 months last year, when things were tighter. I was cutting the pills in half. The doctor said it wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. Ryan went to the pharmacy that afternoon. He put his credit card on file for Frank's prescriptions. He didn't mention it to Frank until it was done, and when he did, Frank started to object, and Ryan said, please don't. Frank looked at him for a moment, and then nodded. Graham Foss's preliminary report came in on a Thursday afternoon. Pamela forwarded it with a brief note. Call me when you've read it. Ryan read it in the parking lot of the motel, sitting in the rental car with the engine off. Graham's methodology was clear. He had traced every dollar of Ryan's transfers against what could be documented as reaching Frank and Ruth. Direct deposits, cash withdrawals made in Harlan that corresponded to dates of known expenses, utility payments, pharmacy charges linked to their accounts, grocery receipts available through the pharmacy's prescription records, which had an address on file. The figure at the bottom of the report was precise. Estimated total received by Frank and Ruth Mercer over the 14-year period covered $87, $340. Estimated total diverted to other uses, $660. Ryan read the number twice. $416, now $660. He called Pamela. Preliminary, she said immediately. We'll have a more refined number once we have Dennis's full bank records. But this is defensible as a baseline. What does it mean legally? It means we have a very strong foundation for the elder financial exploitation claim. It also means the criminal referral becomes almost automatic if we take this to civil proceedings. She paused. Ryan, this is one of the more significant cases I've seen in terms of duration and amount. Your brother has been doing this for 14 years. This wasn't opportunistic. He set up a system. Ryan sat in the parking lot and let that land. 14 years. A system. He thought about Dennis's voice in the diner. I was here, Ryan. I was the one making the calls. I was the one driving them to appointments. All of it designed to be true, just enough to be used as cover for the rest. He thought about his mother at the florist shop. His father's split blood pressure pills. The metal box Frank had been quietly filling for 2 years, waiting for someone to come home who might know what to do with it. What's next? Ryan said. Pamela said, we petition to void the power of attorney, and we get ready for Dennis to push back. It was a quiet evening. Frank was resting, and Ryan sat with Ruth at the small kitchen table while she sorted through some papers, the comfortable noise of a life arranged in a small space. He had the printout from his bank account folded in his jacket pocket. He had been carrying it for 2 days, trying to find the right way in. He put it on the table. Mom, I want to show you something. Ruth put down what she was holding and looked at the paper. He walked her through it slowly, each line, each date, each amount. 14 years of transfers. The last one 3 weeks ago. He asked, did you know I was sending money every month? Ruth looked at the printout for a long time without speaking. Her face did something he couldn't entirely read, a movement behind the eyes that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite shock. More like the particular expression of someone who has suspected something and is now seeing confirmation and doesn't yet know how to hold both feelings at once. Dennis told us, she said finally, that you stopped the support about 6 years ago. When the business was growing, he said you needed the capital for expansion. He said it was completely understandable. Ryan said nothing. Ruth looked up from the paper. He said you were in a growth phase, that you were putting everything back into the company. He said you'd explained it to him and he understood, and that we should understand too. Mom. Ryan kept his voice as steady as he could. Every transfer is there, every one, including 3 weeks ago. Ruth looked at the printout again. Her eyes moved down the columns without speaking. 6,000 entries of proof, give or take, printed on 3 pages and sitting on her kitchen table. He told us you'd moved on, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Ryan said, moved on from what? She didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands on the table and looked at them. Then she said carefully, as if she was choosing each word from a difficult inventory. He told us you had a full life there. A company, friends, a different world. He said it was natural that people outgrow their beginnings, that you were proud of us, but that we weren't really part of your life anymore in a practical sense. She paused. He said he had talked to you, and that you both agreed it was better to let you go forward without the obligation of all of this. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. I never said anything like that, Ryan said. I know. Ruth's voice was flat in a way that meant she was holding herself very carefully. I think I knew. But it was easier to believe him than to think you'd. She stopped. Started again. We didn't want to be a burden on a man who was building something. And if you'd decided that you needed space from us, we didn't want to make it harder. By her voice caught once briefly, and she controlled it. We didn't want to make it worse. Frank appeared in the doorway. He had heard or sensed it. He stood there looking at both of them. Ryan said, I never stopped. Not for a month. Not for a week. Frank came and sat down at the table. The 3 of them were quiet for a moment. The particular silence of people absorbing something that changes the meaning of years past. Then Ruth stood without a word. She went to the bedroom. Ryan heard the closet door, a shelf being moved, a box being pulled. She returned with a shoebox, the kind you get from a shoe purchase, taped around the lid, the tape yellowed with age. She set it on the table and took the lid off. Inside were letters. Not 1 or 2, many. Folded, some of them, others in envelopes addressed in Ruth's careful handwriting. Ryan's name on each one. His addresses over the years, Stuttgart first, then the Singapore office. None of them mailed. I wrote them, Ruth said. She sat back down. When things were hard or when something happened that I wanted you to know about. A health scare your father had. The winter the heating unit broke and we used space heaters for 6 weeks. His birthday. Christmas. She looked at the box. I kept writing them and then not sending them. Because Dennis would ask about the mail and because I didn't want to make you feel like we were demanding. Like we were pulling you back. Ryan looked at the box and then at his mother. And because Ruth continued, I was afraid you wouldn't answer. And I thought if I never sent them, at least I wouldn't know for certain. The kitchen was silent again. Ryan reached into the box and took the letter on top, the most recent one from the date stamped on the envelope flap. He unfolded it. It was dated 3 months ago. Ruth's handwriting careful and unhurried. He read it. Ryan, if you ever read this, know that your father and I never blamed you for leaving. We always understood why you had to go. We only hoped you remembered us sometimes. We are proud of you. We have always been proud of you. Even when it was hard to say so to anyone. He put the letter down. He looked at his mother and his father and the years of evidence in the shoebox on the table between them, and did not trust himself to speak for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I remembered you every day." Ruth put her hand over his. Frank looked at this table. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. It was Ryan who finally spoke again. He said Dennis sent something to my attorney today, a legal filing. He pulled out his phone and checked the email Pamela had forwarded. He's filing an emergency petition. He's claiming I'm trying to exert undue influence over you and that I have no right to be involved in your affairs. Frank and Ruth both looked at him. "What does that mean?" Frank asked. "It means he knows we're looking at the documents, and he's trying to get ahead of it." Frank nodded slowly. His expression was the expression of a man who had known the other shoe was coming and had simply been waiting for it to drop. "What do we do?" Ruth said. "We let my attorney handle it," Ryan said. "And we don't sign anything Dennis puts in front of us, not until I've seen it first." Ruth looked at the shoebox. Then she looked at Ryan. "He'll come," she said. "He'll come here and try to explain it away," probably, Ryan said. "And we tell him no." "Yes." She nodded once with the contained decisiveness of a woman who had spent years swallowing things she should have said and had now run out of space for it. "Yes," she said again. "We tell him no." Dennis came 2 days later. He arrived at the apartment at 11 in the morning without calling ahead, which was itself a statement. He carried a bag of groceries and a paper bag from the bakery on 3rd Street that he knew Ruth favored. He was warm at the door, kissed Ruth's cheek, shook Frank's hand, set the groceries on the kitchen counter with the ease of someone accustomed to moving through this space. Frank had told Ryan the night before that Dennis sometimes came by without notice. Had for years. Ryan had asked, "Does he usually bring things?" Frank had said carefully, "He brings things when he wants something." Ryan wasn't there when Dennis arrived. He had called ahead, and Frank had mentioned Dennis was coming, which he'd learned from Ruth, who had a feeling about the timing. Ryan was with Pamela in London. Frank had said, "We'll be fine. Come when you can." Dennis sat with Frank and Ruth and made conversation for 20 minutes before he produced the folder. He set it on the coffee table with the naturalness of something routine. "Just some corrections to the old paperwork," he said. "Routine administrative stuff. The attorney suggested we update a few of the forms now that the house situation has changed." Frank looked at the folder. He didn't touch it. "What attorney?" "A fellow I use for the business. You don't need to read all of it. It's pretty technical. Just your signatures and the places I've marked." Ruth said, "We'd like Ryan to look at it first." Dennis's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted just slightly, the way a person shifts when the ground turns unexpectedly firm under a step they thought would be soft. "Ryan doesn't know these arrangements," he said. "He's been abroad a long time. He doesn't understand how things work around here." Frank said he understands enough. "Dad." Dennis's tone was patient, almost gentle. "I'm not trying to make this complicated. This is just paperwork. It'll take you 5 minutes. Then it can wait 5 more days until Ryan has seen it," Ruth said. The front door opened. Ryan had driven back from London and come directly arriving 12 minutes after Dennis's car appeared in the parking lot, which he'd known because Lorraine had texted him the plate and the time from her window across the old street when she saw Dennis driving toward the east side of town. Lorraine had become, over the past 2 weeks, something of an informal surveillance network. Dennis looked at Ryan with an expression of well-managed surprise. "Hey, didn't know you were coming by." Ryan crossed to the kitchen counter, set his keys down, and said pleasantly, "What are we signing?" "Just routine updates. I'd like to see them." Dennis looked at him for a moment. The pleasant expression held. It was a durable expression, Ryan had noticed. Designed for durability. Ryan, I don't think you need to be involved in every administrative detail. I disagree. Ryan picked up the folder from the coffee table and opened it. He read for about 30 seconds. The documents were, as he suspected, not routine. They appeared to be a revised financial management agreement establishing Dennis's authority over a new set of accounts with broader terms than before. He closed the folder. "We're not signing these," he said. Dennis looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes, a calculation quickly completed. He said, "All right." He picked up his coffee cup, drank, set it down. He looked at Frank and Ruth. "You know, I'm just trying to protect you. That's all I've ever been trying to do." Frank said, "We know." It was 2 words delivered without heat, and they meant nothing reassuring. Dennis left 10 minutes later. He was still pleasant as he went, still warm. He hugged Ruth, told Frank to call him if his hip was giving him trouble. But at the door, as he was putting his jacket on, he looked at Ryan for just a moment. The pleasantness was still there, but something underneath it had clarified. "You're going to cause a lot of problems for this family," he said. Quietly, so Frank and Ruth wouldn't hear clearly from the kitchen where they had moved. "I'll take that risk," Ryan said. Dennis left. Ryan stayed for another hour with his parents, talking about nothing significant, which was itself significant, the practice of normalcy after disruption. After he drove back to the motel, he called Pamela to report the paperwork. She said she was not surprised. She said she'd have a response to Dennis's emergency petition filed by end of week. His phone rang again at 9:15 that evening. "Unknown number." He answered. A woman's voice, careful and quiet. The voice of someone standing in a room they want to speak in privately. "Is this Ryan Mercer?" "Yes." "This is Carol, Dennis's wife." A pause. "I need to tell you something. I've been trying to decide whether to call for about a week, and I think you need to know." Ryan sat up on the motel bed. "I'm listening." "The home equity loan," Carol said. "The one from the house. I know what Dennis did with the money. Most of it. He didn't use it for your parents." Ryan said, "Tell me." Her voice dropped even quieter. "He was in debt. The contracting business, 2 suppliers he owed a lot of money to, and an equipment financing company. He used about $130,000 of it to pay those off. The rest, it went to his own account. And some of it filtered out over time. Your parents got almost nothing from it." Ryan absorbed this. "Carol, would you be willing to say that to an attorney?" A long pause. The sound of a door somewhere in the background, and then the particular silence of someone making sure they're not overheard. "Yes," she said. "I think I would. I've been sitting with this a long time. And She stopped. Started again. "I'm not going to keep sitting with it." Ryan said, "I'll have my attorney contact you tomorrow. Is that all right?" "Yes," Carol said. "Don't tell Dennis I called." "I won't." The line went quiet. Ryan set the phone down and sat in the motel room, looking at the wall. He thought she must have known for a long time. 14 years is a long time to know something and stay quiet. He didn't judge her for it. Fear produces its own particular silences, and he had no information about what life with Dennis had been like from the inside. He only knew that she had called tonight, and that was what mattered now. He called Pamela and left a message. Then he sat for a while longer in the quiet of the motel room, thinking about what it meant that the person who had finally tipped the balance toward truth was someone who had been inside the lie the whole time. Carol spoke with Pamela for 2 hours the following afternoon. Ryan was not on the call. Pamela had suggested it would be more useful to have Carol's account in a clean format, without the brother dynamic complicating the conversation. She sent Ryan a summary that evening. The account was specific and precise in the way that suggests someone has been rehearsing it mentally for a long time. Dennis had owed money to 2 construction supply companies combined approximately $85,000 and to a heavy equipment financing company that had issued a notice of default on a skid steer he'd financed and largely used for personal landscaping work, not the business. Total business-related debt approximately $130,000 loan. He had used the equity loan proceeds to satisfy all 3 of these. He had told Carol at the time that it was a temporary bridge he'd pay the house loan from business revenue once the accounts were cleared. He never did. When the equity loan went into default, he told Carol the situation had gotten away from him and that selling the house was the only way through. He had given Frank and Ruth approximately $10,000 from the $73,000 that remained after the loan balance was settled. The rest had been distributed across Dennis's personal accounts and the contracting business. Carol had seen the transfers. She had not asked about them until recently, when things between her and Dennis had deteriorated to the point where she had stopped being afraid of what she might find. "She's scared," Pamela said on the phone. "Not of physical harm, she didn't indicate that. But he controls the finances entirely, and she doesn't know what she'll have access to if she leaves. She needs to move carefully." Ryan said, "What does she want in exchange for testifying?" "She hasn't asked for anything," Pamela said. "That's actually a positive indicator. People who are lying for advantage tend to negotiate. She seems to be doing this because she's reached the end of tolerating it." A pause. "I'll suggest she get her own counsel. That protects everyone." The hospital records came in the following day. Pamela had requested them through the legal process available under the Elder Financial Abuse Statutes. Records relevant to the capacity of a signatory at the time of a disputed legal document were accessible with appropriate filing. The records covered Frank's full hospitalization admission through discharge, admitting diagnosis and surgical notes, lumbar spinal stenosis L3, L5, surgical procedure laminectomy with partial discectomy. Post-operative medications on day 5, the day of the POA signing, included oxycodone 10 mg every 4 to 6 hours, as needed a muscle relaxant and a sleep aid prescribed for the previous 2 evenings, due to reported difficulty sleeping. The attending physician's progress notes for days 4 through 6 documented Frank's orientation status with the language standard to post-surgical assessment. Patient alert but confused regarding date and location during morning rounds. Reoriented with prompting. Not recommended for complex decision-making at this time. Not recommended for complex decision-making at this time. Pamela read Ryan the phrase over the phone and then let it sit. "That's the POA voiding case," she said. "Right there. The attending physician's own notes say he was not competent to make complex decisions on the day of signing. A power of attorney is by definition a complex decision. The notary who certified the document had an obligation to assess capacity. A plaintiff's attorney would argue the notary either failed that obligation or actively misrepresented the situation. Who was the notary? We're still running that. Dennis brought him to the hospital, which is unusual in itself. Typically, you use a notary local to the location. We're checking his credentials and any connections to Dennis. Pamela filed the response to Dennis's emergency petition that afternoon. She challenged his claim that Ryan had no standing, establishing that both Frank and Ruth had provided statements in support of Ryan's involvement. She attached the preliminary forensic report from Graham redacted for the proceedings, but sufficient to demonstrate the scope of the financial discrepancy. She included a request for the full bank record subpoena to be expedited under Elder Financial Abuse Statutes. 3 days later, Pamela called with something that had been bothering her about Dennis's petition. He filed a sworn declaration from a man named Earl Jessup, she said. Jessup claims he was present on several occasions when your parents freely and voluntarily engaged in financial planning with Dennis. He describes them as clear-headed, enthusiastic about the arrangements, grateful for Dennis's help. Who is Earl Jessup? Carol's brother. Estranged, they stopped speaking about 3 years ago after a dispute over their mother's estate. Dennis was on Carol's side of that dispute. Ryan took a moment to process this. So Dennis filed a supporting declaration from his wife's estranged brother, who also owes Dennis money from a personal loan Dennis gave him during the estate dispute, according to Carol. We're going to have no trouble establishing his credibility issues. Pamela's voice was dry. More interesting, Frank. Can you remember who was present at the hospital during the POA signing? Ryan asked Frank that evening. Frank thought carefully. Dennis, he said. And one other man. He hadn't recognized him, but he remembered he was stocky with a beard. Frank's description matched Earl Jessup's driver's license photo that Pamela had pulled from public records. He brought his own witness, Ryan said to Pamela. He went to the hospital with the document already prepared, a notary he controlled, and a witness who was positioned to corroborate, Pamela said. Which means this was not a moment of opportunity. This was a plan he executed during a window he created by waiting for your father to have surgery. Ryan sat with that for a moment. Pamela, he said. How long until the hearing? It's set for Thursday morning. 4 days. What do we need between now and then? We need Frank and Ruth willing to testify. We need Carol's formal statement. And we need to be ready for Dennis to do something unexpected before Thursday. What kind of unexpected? In my experience, Pamela said, when someone realizes they're losing control of a situation they've managed for 14 years, they tend to make one last direct move. I don't know what form it will take, but I'd expect it before Thursday. She was right. It came on Wednesday evening. The week before, the hearing moved quickly for Ryan, meetings with Pamela, calls with Graham, paperwork, but slowly for Frank and Ruth, the way time always moves slowly when you're waiting for something you can't control. Pamela's deposition of Earl Jessup took place Tuesday morning. She sent Ryan a brief summary. Afterward, Jessup had contradicted his own declaration on 3 points: the dates he claimed to have been present, a specific conversation he claimed to have witnessed that contradicted documented events, and his assertion that he knew Frank and Ruth independently of Dennis. Under direct questioning, he admitted he had met them through Dennis. Pamela filed the deposition contradictions with the court. On the same afternoon, Carol submitted her formal statement, 3 pages specific and signed. Her own attorney, a family law practitioner in Harlan, had looked it over and confirmed it was in proper form. Pamela filed it as a supporting exhibit. Lorraine Whitfield's affidavit was already on record. She described what she had observed Dennis loading boxes from the house 18 months ago. The conversation in which he told her the parents were downsizing her receipt of Ruth's note with the apartment address. She described the tone of the house in the months before: less activity, fewer visitors, the quality of neglect that accumulates slowly enough that you doubt what you're seeing until it's undeniable. By Wednesday morning, Pamela believed their position was strong. She said so on the call. Ryan said Pamela said to expect something unexpected before Thursday. Pamela said, I said that, yes. I still believe it. Ryan drove to the apartment at 2 that afternoon to check in with his parents. He planned to go over what the hearing would look like, not to prepare them as witnesses, so much as to reduce the anxiety of the unknown. Frank was always calmer when he had accurate information about what was coming. Ruth was calmer when she had something to do, so Ryan had asked if she wanted to bring anything to the courthouse. She had decided to bring the shoebox, on the theory that if the judge needed to understand what her silence had looked like, a box of unsent letters was better evidence than words. He arrived at the apartment at 2:15. Frank's car was in the parking lot. A second car, Dennis's truck, was also there. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. He walked up the stairs. The apartment door was slightly ajar. He could hear voices. He pushed the door open quietly. Dennis was sitting in the armchair across from Frank. His posture was relaxed, but his hands were on his knees, a posture that suggested effort behind the ease. Frank was on the couch. Ruth was not visible. She might have been in the kitchen or the bedroom. Dennis was speaking when Ryan entered. And the thing is, when lawyers get involved, judges get cautious. They look at situations like this, and they think these are elderly people. Are they able to manage their own affairs? And sometimes what they decide is that the family shouldn't be making decisions at all. They bring in a state-appointed guardian. That means someone who doesn't know you doesn't know this family decides where you live, who you see, what you spend. He paused. His voice was measured, almost kind. I'm not saying that's what will happen. I'm saying you should think carefully about what happens when you go against family. Frank looked at him. He did not look alarmed. His expression was the expression of a man watching something he expected, which was itself, Ryan now understood, a kind of preparation. Ryan stepped fully into the room. Dennis looked up. Something crossed his face, not panic, not quite. The look of a man recalculating. I didn't hear you knock, Dennis said. The door was open, Ryan said. He looked at his father. Dad, are you all right? Frank nodded. We were just talking. Dennis stood. He was smooth about it, unhurried. I was checking in on them. Nothing wrong with that. No, Ryan said. Nothing wrong with that. The three of them stood in the small living room for a moment, Dennis looking at Ryan. Ryan looking at Dennis, Frank looking at both of them with the stillness of a man who has made his decision and is simply waiting for the situation to catch up. Dennis picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair. I'll let you have your family time, he said. He said goodbye to Frank, called toward the kitchen for Ruth, got no answer, and left. Ryan waited until he heard the truck engine start and pull out of the parking lot. Then he looked at his father. Frank reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and held up his phone. I thought he'd come, Frank said. Pamela said last week that when people lose control of things they've managed for a long time, they tend to make a direct move. And Dennis has never known when to stop. He looked at the phone. I pressed record before he sat down. Ryan crossed the room and sat beside his father on the couch. Frank played the recording. Dennis's voice came through the phone speaker, clear and unhurried. The state-appointed guardian, the decision about where you live. The careful, not quite threat, constructed with just enough plausible distance to seem like concern. And then, you should think carefully about what happens when you go against family. The recording continued for another minute, Frank's quiet responses, and then Ryan's entrance, and then Dennis leaving. Then silence. Frank put the phone on the coffee table. Ryan looked at it for a moment. Then he said, "He came here to threaten you the night before the hearing." "He came here to make me scared," Frank said. "Those are different things." Ryan looked at his father. Frank was looking at the phone on the coffee table with an expression that was not satisfaction, exactly more the expression of a man who has spent a long time waiting for the right piece to fall into place and has now felt it land. "I've been waiting 2 years for him to say something out loud," Frank said. "Every month when he dropped off the money. Every time he came to check in. I kept thinking eventually he'll miscalculate. Eventually he'll say the quiet part where I can catch it." He looked at Ryan. "I just needed the right time." Ryan said, "He doesn't know you recorded it." "No," Frank said. "He doesn't." Ryan called Pamela. She answered immediately. He told her what Frank had. There was a brief silence on her end. "Send me the audio file tonight," she said. Under Kentucky law, one-party consent recording is legal. Frank is a party to the conversation, so this is entirely admissible. This is what we needed. Another pause. Tell your father he's extraordinary. Ryan looked at Frank, who was sitting quietly on the couch looking at his own hands. I'll tell him, Ryan said. He ended the call. Outside, the evening had settled over Harlan. The parking lot was quiet. Tomorrow was Thursday. Ryan sat with his father in the small living room for a while longer, not talking much just there, which was itself the thing that should have been happening all along. The Harlan County Courthouse had the particular quality of small-town institutional buildings, solid, slightly worn, shaped by decades of use. Ryan arrived at 8:40, 20 minutes early. His parents were already there, sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom with Pamela. Frank wore his good flannel shirt again, the dark red one. Ruth had brought the shoebox as promised in a canvas bag. Dennis arrived at 8:55 with his attorney, a man named Croft, who Ryan had not met, who had the particular practiced ease of someone accustomed to courtroom maneuvering in small jurisdictions. Carol was not with Dennis. Ryan looked for her and found her already inside the courtroom, seated on the opposite side of the gallery beside her own attorney. Judge Hollis entered at 9:02. She was a woman in her late 50s with the manner of someone who had heard most arguments before and wanted the facts, not the performance. Dennis's attorney opened with the petition's central argument. Ryan Mercer had been absent from his parents' lives for 14 years. He had no established legal relationship with their financial affairs. His sudden reappearance and intervention in existing management arrangements his parents had freely entered, constituted an attempt to exert undue influence over vulnerable elderly individuals who had found stable and effective support through Dennis Mercer. Pamela's response was measured and quick. Standing was not at issue. Frank and Ruth Mercer had both provided statements, welcoming Ryan's involvement and requesting the court's protection from ongoing financial management they now understood to have been unauthorized. The question before the court was whether the power of attorney used to establish Dennis's authority was valid, and whether the management conducted under that authority constituted elder financial abuse under Kentucky statute. Pamela presented the bank record summary first. 14 years of Ryan's transfers to Dennis's personal account. Graham Foss's forensic report, $87 billion, $340, reaching Frank and Ruth of $500 more to $2.70. She requested the court take judicial notice of the bank's subpoena records, which the court accepted. Dennis's attorney objected that Dennis had authority to manage funds and discretion in their distribution, that the existence of a transfer to his account did not prove misuse. Pamela acknowledged the objection and said she would address the foundation of that authority, the power of attorney. She submitted the hospital records. She read clearly the attending physician's progress notes from February 14th, the day of the POA signing. Patient alert, but confused regarding date and location during morning rounds. Reoriented with prompting. Not recommended for complex decision-making at this time. She noted the medications documented in that day's chart: oxycodone 10 milliliters, a muscle relaxant, a sleep aid. She noted the date on the power of attorney, February 14th. She noted the notary who certified the document, the notary's license number cross-referenced against the Harlan County Notary Registry, showed a license issued 6 months prior to the signing, sponsored by Dennis Mercer as the referring professional. Dennis's attorney objected again. This was circumstantial, and capacity at the moment of signing was a matter of clinical judgment that required a medical expert, not a progress note. Pamela said, "I'll call Carol Mercer." Dennis, in the defendant's seat, looked at his attorney. Carol took the stand. She gave her name, her relationship to Dennis, the duration of their marriage. Pamela asked her about the home equity loan. Carol described in the same specific terms she had given in her recorded statement The debts Dennis had paid from the loan proceeds the two construction suppliers, the equipment financing company. She gave the names. She described the conversations she had been present for when Dennis planned and executed these payments. She described what Dennis told her about the remaining proceeds and what had actually gone to Frank and Ruth. Dennis's attorney crossed carefully, trying to establish that Carol had an adversarial relationship with Dennis, that her account was motivated by marital conflict. Carol acknowledged they were separated and that she had retained her own attorney. She said, "That doesn't change what I saw." Pamela played the recording, Dennis's voice in the courtroom, and for a moment the room was completely still, the way rooms go still when something that has been private is suddenly public. You should think carefully about what happens when you go against family. Pamela noted that the recording was made by Frank Mercer in his own residence with Frank, as a party to the conversation, and that it was fully admissible under Kentucky's one-party consent statute. Dennis's attorney objected. Judge Hollis overruled. Frank Mercer took the stand. He moved to the witness stand with the stiffness in his hip that Ryan had noticed, but his back was straight, and his voice when he spoke was clear. He described the hospital room on day 5, the back of his head still tight with the particular pressure of post-surgical medication. Dennis appearing in the room with 2 men. A folder placed in front of him. Dennis explaining it was just so he could pay the bills while Frank was laid up. The difficulty Frank had focusing on the text, he could see the words, but they wouldn't arrange themselves into meaning. His question, "What am I signing?" Dennis's answer, "Just a form, Dad. It's nothing complicated." "He read parts of it to me," Frank said. "He didn't read all of it. I asked what it was called, and he said it was a financial management authorization. I asked if it would let him sell the house, and he said, 'No, Dad, of course not.'" The courtroom was quiet. "I believed him," Frank said. "He was my son. I was on medication. I believed him." He said it without bitterness. It was a statement of fact, what had been true at that moment, and what the truth had cost him. Judge Hollis's ruling came after a 30-minute recess. The power of attorney executed on February 14th was voided effective immediately. The attending physician's documented assessment combined with the medication record and the circumstances of signing, including the use of a notary sponsored by the beneficiary of the document, established sufficient grounds to find the signature invalid for lack of capacity. All financial management actions taken by Dennis Mercer under the authority of the voided document were declared unauthorized. Dennis Mercer was ordered to have no contact with Frank or Ruth Mercer pending completion of full legal proceedings. The court clerk was directed to make a referral to the Harlan County Prosecutor's Office for review of the matter under Kentucky's Elder Financial Abuse Statutes, KRS 209.0020, given the scale and duration of the documented financial diversion. The hearing ended at 12:40. Ryan followed his parents out of the courthouse into the October light. Frank walked slowly but upright, Ruth's arm through his, carrying the shoebox under her other arm. The air was cool and clear, the particular quality of late morning in the mountains, when the light comes sideways through the trees. Lorraine was on the courthouse steps waiting. She had asked that morning if she could come. Ryan had said yes. She looked at Frank and Ruth coming through the doors, and then at Ryan behind them. She nodded once. No words. None were needed. Ryan looked at his father's back, straight in the good flannel shirt moving through the sunlight, with the careful dignity of a man who had held on to the truth for 2 years with nowhere to put it, and had finally been heard. In the weeks that followed the hearing, the shape of things changed slowly, in some places quickly, in others in the uneven way that real consequences tend to arrive. Dennis's contracting business lost 3 accounts in the first 10 days. Word travels in small towns along the particular channels of trust and reputation, and Harlan County was a small enough town that what happened in the courthouse on Thursday was understood without formal announcement by the people who used Dennis Mercer to build their additions and re-roof their barns. 2 of them called and canceled contracts politely without explanation. A third sent a brief email. Mercer and Sons contracting went from 4 ongoing jobs to 1 in under a fortnight. His attorney contacted Pamela at the end of the 2nd week with an offer to discuss settlement. Dennis, the attorney, said understood that a civil trial would be difficult for all parties and would like to explore whether an agreement was possible. Pamela presented the offer to Ryan, a structured repayment of $180,000 over 5 years, secured by the assets of the contracting business equipment accounts, receivable any remaining business property. Ryan sat with the number. It was a fraction of the documented diversion, which was itself a conservative estimate. But a civil trial would take another year or more, and whatever could be recovered from Dennis's assets was limited by what those assets actually were. He discussed it with Frank and Ruth. They sat at the kitchen table of the apartment, the same table where Ruth had shown him the shoebox, and he explained the numbers plainly without softening. Frank said, "The criminal case still goes forward." "Yes," Ryan said. "The civil settlement doesn't affect the criminal referral. The prosecutor is reviewing it independently." Ruth said, "Then what we can get in a settlement is less important than making sure it's on record for what it was." "That's one way to look at it." Frank looked at his wife. She looked back at him. Whatever passed between them in that look had the economy of 47 years of marriage a great deal communicated in no words at all. Frank said, "Accept it. Get what we can. The rest is for the law." Ryan authorized Pamela to proceed. The settlement paperwork was signed the following week. The structured repayment would begin the following month. Pamela filed it with the court. The county prosecutor's office sent notification that a formal inquiry had been opened under KRS 209.020, the Kentucky Elder Financial Abuse Statute. The inquiry would take time, months, possibly longer, but it had begun. Carol filed for divorce 10 days after the hearing. She moved to her sister's home in Lexington, taking what she could fit in 2 carloads and leaving the rest. Ryan didn't speak to her directly during this period, but Pamela did occasionally for clarifications on the statement. Carol always answered promptly and accurately. She was doing what she had decided to do, and she was doing it completely. Ryan set up a direct account for Frank and Ruth. No intermediary, no management by anyone else, accessible directly by them at a bank branch 3 blocks from the apartment. He transferred 3 months' worth of support as an initial deposit so they would have reserves. He set up the recurring transfer from his international account to go directly there. Frank resisted. At first he said it was too much. Ryan said, "Dad, please." Frank looked at him for a long moment and then said, "All right." The pharmacy account was already settled. Frank's blood pressure medication and 1 other prescription were both now fully covered. The pharmacist, who had known Frank for years, asked once about the change, and Frank simply said things had sorted themselves out. Ruth gave 2 weeks' notice at the florist shop. Mrs. Hadley was understanding. On her last day, the other employees, a woman named Diane and a part-timer named Bree, gave her a small bunch of flowers from the cooler tied with a ribbon. Ruth brought them home and put them in a glass on the kitchen table and looked at them for a while without saying anything. Ryan found the house on the north end of Harlan on the 2nd week he spent looking. He had been clear with himself about what he was looking for: modest single-story with outdoor space and room for 2 people to live without feeling crowded. The house on Sycamore Ridge Trail had a covered porch, a small yard with several old maples, a kitchen with good light, and 3 bedrooms, so there would be a room when Ryan came to visit. He made an offer, and it was accepted. He told his parents over dinner at the apartment, showing them photos on his phone. Ruth looked at the porch. She said, "That's a good porch." Frank said, "Are those maples going to need much maintenance?" Ryan said, "Probably not much." Frank said, "Good. My hip is better in warm weather, but it's slower in the cold." They sat on the apartment's small balcony that evening after dinner, the October air carrying first true chill of the season. The town was quiet. A few cars on the street. The sound of something in a yard, 2 buildings over, a dog, a child, some ordinary noise. Frank said, "I should tell you something." Ryan waited. "When Dennis told us you'd moved on," Frank said, "I didn't believe him right away. I waited about a year before I let myself start to think he might be right. Because you were still calling. You called about once a month, sometimes more. And you sounded the same." Ryan said, "I was the same, I know. But the calls got a little shorter over time, and Dennis would say things in between, just small things, nothing dramatic. Ryan mentioned he's really stretched at the office. Ryan said he doesn't get home much anymore. Little things that added up, until the calls felt like you checking a box rather than actually talking to us." He looked at the street. "I told myself I was misreading it. And then Dennis told us you'd officially stopped the support, and I thought maybe I wasn't misreading it." Ryan looked at his father. He thought about 14 years of phone calls that were too short. He thought about the distance between responsibility expressed in money and responsibility expressed in presence. He thought about how easy it had been to let Dennis be the bridge. "I should have come home more," Ryan said. Frank shook his head. "You were building something. We understood that. I should have come home more anyway." Frank looked at him. "Yes," he said. "You probably should have." It was not an accusation. It was the kind of statement that could only be made between people who trusted each other enough to say the true thing without using it as a weapon. Ryan sat with it. "I'm going to come more often," he said. "Not just for crises." Frank nodded. He looked at the street below. "Good," he said. "That would be good." They sat for a while longer in the October evening, in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had found their way back to each other through something difficult, and had not in the finding pretended the difficulty hadn't existed. Frank Mercer's 75th birthday fell on a Saturday in the 3rd week of October, which in Harlan County meant the mountains were at their peak, the particular red and gold of eastern Kentucky in autumn, the air carrying just enough bite to remind you what was coming. The new house on Sycamore Ridge Trail was still partly in boxes. The furniture had arrived the week before, some of it from the apartment. Some of it new, the 2 spaces not quite matching yet in the way of a home still finding its own arrangement. The kitchen was fully set up because Ruth had insisted on that first, and the covered porch had 2 chairs and a small table because Frank had asked for that second. Ruth had started baking at 6 in the morning. Ryan woke to the smell of apples and cinnamon coming through the house, her apple cake, which she hadn't made in years. When he came downstairs, she was at the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder, and the kitchen had the particular quality of a kitchen that is being used the way it was always meant to be. Lorraine arrived at noon with a pecan pie and a small pot of chrysanthemums. She set both on the kitchen table and looked around the house with the expression of someone taking in information she has been curious about for weeks. "Good light," she said, which was all the approval the house needed. Ray Caulfield and his wife Ellen came at 1. Ray had been with Frank in the mine for 12 years, had retired 2 years before Frank, and had the solid humor of a man who has seen hard things and decided not to take himself too seriously. Behind them came the Prewitts from the old street who had known Frank and Ruth for 30 years, and had they said been very glad to get the address. The afternoon settled into the warm noise of a house full of people. Frank sat in the chair on the porch and received visitors with the dignity of a man who understood the occasion. When Ray Caulfield said he'd heard Frank had sorted out some family business recently, Frank said simply, "It worked out." Ray clapped him on the shoulder and didn't press. Ryan moved between the kitchen and the porch, and the living room, refilling glasses, finding plates, doing the minor work that gatherings require. He watched his parents move through the party, his father in the outdoor chair, greeting people with the ease of someone who had not always lived on the margin of his own life. His mother in the kitchen doorway offering cake and laughing at something Ellen Caulfield said, and felt the specific relief of seeing something restored that had been taken not by time or circumstance, but by a person who had decided their own need was more important than the two people they were supposed to protect. The guests left by 4. The October light had moved into its late afternoon angle, long and gold through the maple leaves. The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table with the remains of the cake and their coffee. It was the first time since Ryan had been back that it felt completely quiet, not the quiet of things unspoken, but the quiet of things settled. Ruth got up once and went to the bedroom. She returned with the shoebox. She set it on the table between them, the way she had set it on the table in the apartment a month ago. But this time she lifted the lid herself and took out a letter, not the most recent one, but one from several years back. She handed it to Ryan without explaining. He opened it. It was dated 5 years ago, October also, the year of Frank's 60th anniversary as a union member. Ruth had apparently tried to call Ryan that week and gotten voicemail, which she said in the letter she understood, and that she hoped he was well. She wrote about the cold coming early that year. She wrote that his father had been quiet but eating well. She wrote that she had made the apple cake for the union dinner, and that Frank had brought home a slice for her, wrapped in foil, which made her laugh, because he always brought her the slice with the most icing. She wrote near the end, "I try not to miss you too loudly, but some days it comes on all at once and there's nothing to do but write it down and seal it up and put it away for later." Ryan read the letter and then folded it back along the crease and set it down. He looked at his mother. She was looking at him with the particular steadiness of a woman who has carried something difficult for a long time and is deciding whether to finally put it down. He could see the effort in it, not grief exactly, but the work of letting something go that you have held so tightly it has become part of the shape of you. "You could have sent them," Ryan said. "I know," Ruth said. "I wasn't sure you wanted to hear it. I always wanted to hear it." She looked at the shoebox. "I know that now," Frank said. "That's the thing about secrets. They protect the person who keeps them, not the person they're kept from." Ryan looked at his father. Frank had the look he sometimes got, plain and direct and without performance. "Dennis kept his secrets because they served him," he said. "Your mother kept hers because she was trying to protect you. Both of them thought they were being kind, and both of them were wrong." He picked up his coffee cup. "But one of them was also stealing from us, so the comparison ends there." Ruth made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Frank." "I'm just being accurate," Frank said. Ryan looked at both of them, the familiar faces in the kitchen of a house that was still finding itself in a town he had grown up in and spent 14 years leaving behind. He thought about what his parents had given to make his departure possible. He thought about what it had cost them to give it. He thought about Frank working extra years in the mine so that Ryan could afford the first year in Stuttgart. About Ruth cashing in a life insurance policy she'd been paying into for 30 years. About both of them sitting with less than they should have had all those years because they believed in the life he was building even when they thought he'd stopped believing in them. He thought, "I didn't know what I was leaving when I left. I thought I did. I was wrong. I'm sorry," he said. "For all the years I was too far away to know what was happening here." Ruth reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was the same gesture she had made in the apartment a month ago when the printout of transfers was on the table and the shoebox was still closed. "You didn't know," she said. "I should have made it harder for Dennis to build the story he built. I should have been more present. even from a distance. Frank set down his coffee cup. He looked at Ryan with the level gaze of a man who has made his peace with what has happened and is not interested in unnecessary guilt. "Son," he said, "we're not angry at you. Not for a day. Not for one day in 14 years. He paused. "We're just glad you came home." Ryan sat with that for a moment. Outside, the October afternoon was fading. The maple in the front yard was at the edge of its color another week, and the leaves would begin to fall. The town was quiet the way it always had been, at this hour the particular quiet of a place that works hard and rests early. He stayed on the porch after his parents went inside Frank to rest his hip Ruth to put the kitchen in order, both of them moving through the new house with the careful deliberateness of people still learning its distances. He sat in the second chair with his coffee going cold and looked at the street and the trees and the early darkness beginning in the east. He thought about the flight from Singapore, the long transit, the drive south through Tennessee and into the mountains with the radio off, the mailbox with the wrong name, the knock on the wrong door, the stranger's child peering through the screen. He had come home for a birthday that had turned into something else entirely. He had found something that could have gone on being hidden for years more if he had done what he had done for 14 years, sent money and trusted at a distance. He had not fixed what Dennis had done. The law was doing that slowly in the way that law does things. He had not replaced the years that had been taken. No one could. What he had done was come home and stay long enough to understand what home had looked like while he was away. He picked up his phone and opened his calendar. He blocked out the week of Thanksgiving. He blocked out a week in February when the mountain winter would be hardest and Frank's hip would be at its most difficult. He blocked out a week in May. He would not fix the distance of 14 years by staying now, but he would make it different going forward. Not because of the crises ended and lives went on, but because the people inside this house had spent 30 years making choices that pointed in his direction, and it was past time he pointed back. If you've ever come home and realized you didn't know the full story, share it in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more.